Okay, folks, welcome to the Dynasty Fever YouTube channel. I'm Brian Ford. You can find me on Twitter at ffjunkie_. Been a lot of discourse about Anthony Richardson before and since the combine, and been having quite a debate with some folks in a friendly way about why Richardson is sort of worth the risk and a good bet to make. I kind of have been saying, all things considered, all factors factored. I'm comfortable with him even at QB1 now. And that to me is not just like, an overreaction to the combine. It's sort of a cumulative, gradual development in how I've looked at it. And so I'm going to make the case here for Anthony Richardson. This is not going to be one of those, 45-second TikTok friendly videos with lots of graphics coming across the screen and me saying this is why you have to do this and dominate your leagues. My day job is I'm a high school history teacher, and so what I'm hopefully going to do is explain to you in the way that I might with students, the argument that Richardson is a good bet to make. And someone that I like and who is now, all things considered, my QB1. So essentially what we're going to hit on at really sum this up at the end is that there's more floor there than it seems. People are sort of just stereotypically and I think oversimplistically saying, Young and Stroud are floor and Richardson is ceiling. So I'm going to say that there is more floor and also maybe even define floor slightly differently. And therefore, take a look at, how much risk there actually is in what Matt Hicks has called the right kind of risk. And also, mitigating risk through a concept like, value retention, or, it's often called value insulation. So we'll be talking about that from like a nerd perspective. But also, in the end, thinking about, the idea that in Dynasty, really everything we do is making bets, and figuring out when to take bigger swings. And I think all things considered, I'm going to make the case that this is the bet that we make, and we mix our bets, just like, listen, I hate capitalism, but people have investment portfolios and they have a mix of assets, that carry different risk levels, right? And so this is what we do with our Dynasty portfolio. We mix the bets that we're making, smaller, safer ones with bigger swings and that sort of thing. And I think Richardson is the swing to take, even though I'm also going to argue that it's not quite as big a home run swing as people think. So part one is, what did we know before the combine? Like, who was Anthony Richardson as a prospect before he blew up at the combine last weekend? So, I keep saying that even tape folks, will tell you that Richardson is a good bet to make, that it's good risk to absorb because there's something there, right? There's a there. There's stuff to work with. He's got great size. He's young. He's like 2 years younger than Levis, and that's important, right? First of all, I think he's better than Levis, and his flaws are less inherent and more tweakable and coachable. And at the same time, he's 2 years, I don't want to say behind, but earlier in that, in that arc, in that road of development, right? Trying to work with a quote unquote raw prospect like Levis at age 24, and have him unlearn things, as much as he is, by all accounts, a smart dude, is different from a slightly, maybe even more than slightly more moldable and coachable, 21-year-old in Anthony Richardson, right? We all know he's got a rocket for an arm. You saw that at the combine. He's excellent as a runner. And it's not just that he's fast or that he's agile and got wiggle, or that he's like physical and can break tackles. It's all of those, right? Like he has, I think, near elite rushing potential. Like what we're seeing out of guys like Hurts, Fields, Lamar, prime Cam Newton, I think that's there for Richardson. And I think the percentage chance that it's there is being understated by those who are trying to make the case against him. Also, what's underrated is his pocket presence and how he, feels pressure, doesn't get spooked, and how good he is when plays break down, off platform, off schedule, off structure, whatever phrase you want to use, throwing on the run. These are things that he does well, right? And these are important in today's NFL. And another thing is that he's flashed everything you want. The problem has been inconsistency, but it's not like it's not there, right? We've seen very good accuracy in tight windows. We've seen him, use touch and velocity properly. We've seen him read and process, defenses and go through progressions well. It's there, right? It's just, inconsistent, right? It's sort of, he's got good moments on tape and bad moments on tape. And, we'll talk about that in a bit. Also, in the idea that he's, coachable and a good sign is that he's shown improvement on a lot of that stuff from 2021 on tape to 2022 on tape. It doesn't always show up in raw box score stats, but I'm going to give you some links in the description to some videos and other things that you can take a look at that help you go under the hood on Richardson. And one of them is the idea that, we can't just count raw completion percentage, right? While his adjusted completion percentage may have been dead last among the 37 quarterbacks who are 2023 eligible, who had 300 or more dropbacks in 2022, it's still 10 points higher than the completion percentage that people are citing and doing the 54% completion percentage. He can't pass, right? That's not necessarily true. You have to dig through the numbers more, right? And we're encouraged by an 11.5 ADOT, right? I mean, you don't want your quarterback to have too big an ADOT because he's chucking it deep all the time. You don't want him to be dink and dunk and just have a really short ADOT, although that can be effective. Jared Goff, and 11.5 is a pretty good sweet spot, and so that's encouraging as well. And his flaws are fixable, right? I'm going to link a video that Christian Williams did on Anthony Richardson. And in the middle of it, he sort of breaks down how, sort of a lot of the problems with accuracy and errant throws come when he's got happy feet, right? And the happy feet are bad, right? And it's exacerbated by his rotational throwing style, right? So his body isn't working aligned, right? Upper body and lower body aren't together. And so that's coachable. In other words, he's not what Christian calls naturally inaccurate, which I think a guy like Levis is, right? If he's not dinking it and dunking it, Levis, he's chucking it, right? Those like hard throws over the middle and like intermediate and that sort of thing, he's not really making many of them. And those are the ones where you need the most accuracy for. I'm not saying Richardson has been wildly accurate there, but I think the problems with Richardson come in stuff that's more fixable and tweakable and coachable than it is for Levis. And even if it's not more so than Levis, it is in itself tweakable and coachable. Also, I don't like making excuses for players, but I think every player is a mosaic. You have to paint, the picture, to steal another art metaphor, and I think we have to put in context that there was a lot of coaching changes at Florida during his tenure there. I think there were 3 different quarterback coaches and I think at least 2 different offensive coordinators. And that's hard for a kid, and that's lack of stability. I know some people might say, oh, well, he was exposed to different systems. I think it's different for, a 19, 20-year-old than it is for, a veteran quarterback switching teams who already has, NFL experience. I think so. I think we can't discount that, right? Also, his supporting cast was not very good. The running back Etienne was good, and the receivers, pass catchers, were not. And so, Florida ran the ball a lot, whether it was AR or whether it was, Etienne and the running backs, because, the best guy he's thrown to is Justin Shorter. We're not looking at a really good supporting cast, right? Which, to be fair, guys like, Young and Stroud have, right? And that's something to keep in mind when we're evaluating these quarterback prospects. Again, it's not necessarily making excuses. It's painting a full picture, right? No one or two of these things is the positive case for Richardson. It's a collection. It's a constellation. It's a connection of the dots, right? But obviously there are flaws, right? Like everything, he's kind of Jekyll and Hyde on tape. Everything that he sort of flashed that's really good, he's flashed the opposite. We've seen errant throws. We've seen him throw into double coverage and, like, what the heck are you doing? We've seen him make errors with reading and processing, which doesn't bode well, for, a veteran going up against, veteran defensive coordinators in the NFL, or, really savvy, NFL defensive backs, right? I would argue, though, that it's all about the inexperience, right? Inexperience. He only threw 66 passes in college before this season, and he started, I believe, a total of 13 games in his college career, right? That has to be, taken into account when we're looking at these things. It's not that he's bad. It's probably not that he's even really raw per se, so much as he is inexperienced. On the latest episode of Dynasty Fever, our guest Mike Bauer said that, he probably should have gone back for another year at college. I agree, and for what it's worth, it's probably worth saying now, I don't think Stroud or Young should be top 10 NFL picks. I don't think Levis or Richardson should even be first round NFL picks. But that's the way quarterback is in the NFL these days. The other GMs don't want their peers to hit the lottery ticket, and the landscape is pretty icky, right? Daniel Jones is getting $40 million a year, right? So, people teams are willing to risk it for the biscuit with these quarterbacks in the first round. So that's just reality, and yeah, his release and mechanics could use some tweaks. The happy feet, Christian Williams points out that while the release is fast, it's also somewhat elongated. So, there's things to work on, right? I'm not saying he's the perfect prospect and, he's can't miss and anything like that. I do acknowledge that there are flaws there. It's about painting a picture. It's about the mosaic. It's about all things considered, all factors factored. What's the bet? What's the decision that we make after considering all that? I think the bet to make is Anthony Richardson as opposed to Stroud or Young. Even with those flaws and risks, before the combine, Richardson was already gaining steam in the NFL draft world. You were hearing teams more and more interested in him, rising up draft boards, rising up mocks, getting more buzz, right? So even the NFL was coming around to the idea that Richardson might be a better bet to take than we thought, and probably for some teams, a better bet than Levis, Young, or Stroud, right? And then the combine happens, right? So a lot of people especially people who are making the case against Richardson, are sort of being, I think, simplistically dismissive and saying, oh, you're double counting, or you're overhyping the combine, or, I was in a Twitter exchange, a friendly one today, with somebody who said, you can only get so far in 2 days in shorts, and I think that's kind of dismissing the meaning, and also like what those of us who were open-minded and thoughtful on Richardson, where we were at even before the combine. It's not like out of nowhere we just saw the record-breaking numbers and said QB1, right? It's more complex than that, and I think to say otherwise, kind of dismisses a number of people who have been watching this closely and gradually, assessing information and saying maybe Richardson's the guy. So just by the numbers, if you can see them there, he broke records, for the combine, for quarterbacks, since 2003. You can see the good split there on the 40. You can see the percentile scores and everything like that. Like, these are elite athletic numbers, right? I will admit that there were rumors that at the combine, some teams were not really impressed with his football IQ in the interviews, right? And one would think, okay, well, the young man has time to prepare for these sorts of things. He knows these things are coming. He should have done better. I don't disagree with that. Again, I'll say context, right? Probably should have gone back for another year of college. Had a lot of instability as far as coaching goes. He's inexperienced. I would expect him to probably not be as good as someone like Stroud, and especially Young, I think, at those sorts of, whiteboard moments, right? I'm not gonna lie and say, that's where, his super strengths lie, right? But one thing that me and anybody who I think, is reasonable who's on team AR, team Richardson, has been saying all along is, like, he should go somewhere where he can sit for a while, right? Maybe even a whole year, hold the clipboard, and learn and develop, right? So I want to be clear about that, because I haven't said it yet. I'm not looking for Richardson to start day one. And in fact, if he does, I'd be a little nervous. I'd be a little nervous that he could maybe even get ruined. But we'll talk about, even if there are some negatives in the beginning, that we're still okay. We'll talk about that a little later. So just, for reference, this is how the relative athletic score is produced. I'm going to put the link in the description to the site that I cited in the previous slide there. We're looking at just, great, elite, through the roof athletic numbers. You've probably seen this report card before. He compares positively to athletic quarterbacks in the past, like Dante Culpepper and Cam Newton, right? And that's there for him, right? Like I think prime Cam Newton is not this like huge wishful thinking ceiling for Richardson, right? I think it's very attainable. So what did those numbers mean, right? It meant that he is the most athletic quarterback of all time at the NFL Combine, right? It confirmed and affirmed, right, our priors about being very positive and bullish on his athleticism. But it also still surprised us. It exceeded most people's expectations. Even those of us who said he's a very good athlete, he's going to test very well, right? He blew it up. I don't think many people were saying going into the combine, Anthony Richardson is going to be a 10.00 RAS, and he's going to, set records at the vert and the broad for quarterback. Like, that type of athleticism was not expected. So I don't think it's double counting to adjust a little bit post combine, particularly because, and this often goes unsaid when we jump right to, okay, adjust the ranks, right? Like, the combine, right, solidifies, we think, his draft capital as top 10, top 15 draft pick. And that then adjusts our ranks and what we're seeing now in Superflex mocks in ADP, right? We're seeing him go, 102 through 104 now, where he was not before the combine. And hell, some people are even taking him, 101, ahead of Bijan, right? So, I think when a lot of people like to pour water on hype and overreact, and I get that, right? Like, we've seen players get hyped and get overhyped, and not only did it not end up well, but the argument can be made that that it was also bad process to begin with, right? And I think there's an urge, and one that I understand in fantasy spaces, to when the hype train gets going, to want to pump the brakes, to want to pour cold water on this. And as somebody who has a natural inclination to not liking things that are popular precisely because they're popular, and it annoys me, I understand that, right? But I think in that tendency, right, I think folks are cherry picking things. I think they're overstating things. I think they're simplifying what thoughtful people are saying about AR, and not just, you know, somebody who woke up the morning after the combine, didn't know who Anthony Richardson is, and is now saying, you know, QB1, right? And I'm gonna sort of get a little bit more now into why I think the case remains and got better, that, you know, Richardson is the bet to make, all things considered. So what we do in fantasy, particularly in Dynasty, that is constantly being, you know, compared to the stock market, is we're making bets, right? And we need information on what's the good bet to make and the bad bet to make. What's an asset to invest in, and what's one that isn't, right? To me, any notion that Young and Stroud are these, you know, eminently safer investments than AR is, I think is a gross overstatement of what's going on in the QB landscape. And I think it's going to hurt people. Like, I think they're going to hold on to their prior of Young, Stroud floor, AR ceiling, risk, right? I think that's way too simplistic, right? First of all, I don't think he's as risky as you think. There's a good argument that Richardson is the floor play, not just the ceiling play, right? First of all, he's got elite rushing, right? And that gives you a fantasy floor, right? Like, we're not talking about him as an NFL prospect. Like, people get hung up on that. That's why my rookie rankings aren't necessarily purely a take on what I think about the player, right? It's about, you know, what the NFL is going to think, the expected draft capital, the touches they'll get, which turns into fantasy production, the risk reward. Like, it's not just, you know, player good, player ranked high, right? It's more than that. And the thing is, in fantasy, we don't necessarily need Richardson to be, I don't know, 70% of the passer that Stroud or Young, or that we think Stroud or Young are going to be, right? Because he brings in that elite rushing potential, which raises the floor super high, right? And then, so therefore, all he needs to do is really be mediocre at passing, and he's going to produce quarterback one seasons, right? And I'm learning a lesson from Jalen Hurts, and maybe this is me overcorrecting for the trauma of being wrong on Jalen Hurts. I was very dismissive of Jalen Hurts coming into this year. My take was, it's only a cheat code if you can pass well enough to stay on the field, and I need to see him pass well enough, right? I was out pretty much on him. He was my QB 16 in Dynasty coming into this year, right? I was proven wrong, right? I mean, I was right in the sense that, like, I need to see it, show me, right? But I wasn't making the bet, right? And I think I've learned that lesson, and I'm making the bet on Anthony Richardson, right? I think also what we need to think about risk and floor and things like that is, you know, a lot of the case is about relative to Stroud and Young, and I think we're kind of overstating Stroud and Young's floor and overrating them as prospects, right? I'm not saying that they don't, you know, all have, you know, very good traits, but, you know, really, what is Stroud's ceiling? What is Young's ceiling? Really, what is their floor? You know, what is the percentage chance that, you know, Bryce Young, who's has size concerns, and, you know, isn't going to add the rushing floor or the rushing contribution to the fantasy floor, right? Like, can we really assume like that he's got this like super safe floor relative to these other guys. I just don't see it. I think we're overrating those two as prospects and particularly their safety. And in the polite conversation I had about Twitter today, the safety was expressed not necessarily in the stats floor, right? The production floor, but in the longevity floor. And so we'll get into that in a second as well. Even film people are telling you there's a case to make for Anthony Richardson. A lot of times, a lot of these, football guys, not the brand, but like the people, are quick to say that, people who are betting on Richardson are like team nerd, right? Spreadsheets, charts, value-based drafting, ROI plus EV, it's, et cetera, right? I get that, right? But that's not really the case, right? Like, I mentioned Matt Hicks, I mentioned Christian Williams talking about, Richardson in more positive terms than a lot of people are. I'm going to link stuff from them. I'm going to link stuff from Matt Waldman, particularly, a video where, which is essentially just audio of the podcast on YouTube, where he breaks down the quarterback class and talks about you can't just look at box score inaccuracy with Richardson. You got to chart individual passes and see when he's throwing on target and things like that. He also has posted clips on Twitter of, looking at a Richardson interception and saying, not really all his fault, or showing, here, see, he's showing good processing in this clip, right? So it's not just a team nerd take, right? Tape grinders are saying, you might be sleeping on Anthony Richardson, right? So now let's get into, the slightly more nerdy take on why Richardson is not the risk that you think he is, and may even have a lot more floor than you think he is. What I found very helpful in this regard, and what I'm going to link in the description, was an essay by Jakob Sanderson. The title doesn't do it justice. The title is Anthony Richardson is the most athletic quarterback of all time. But really, it's about, all these things that I'm talking about and why he's the good bet to make. The title doesn't do it justice at all. It's highly recommended reading. He has a subscription Substack, but this post was free, and I think it's very relevant. I thought it was so good. I have it pinned on my Twitter profile. So what we're looking at here is the concept of value retention or value insulation. The asset's going to retain its value over time. You're going to be insulated, right? Because this asset has value, right? Why is Richardson in this category? He is a young stud quarterback, who also has rushing, right? Which is important for fantasy, in a super flex, right? Environment with, we assume, good draft capital. That alone retains value, right? In Superflex, right? Even when a quarterback struggles, right? Like a first round, high draft capital, young stud quarterback retains value, right? Look at Justin Fields. Justin Fields is a very divisive, right? Player. At the beginning of last year, as a person bullish on Fields, I was saying, I don't know, that fear that a bad coaching staff might ruin him, it's back, right? And so, yeah, he showed out, he blew up mainly through rushing, right? Isn't throwing very well. I think there's a throwing foundation there, but that's a whole other story. But where's he going in startups and Superflex these days? 108, 109, in the neighborhood of Lamar Jackson, right? Like, why? Young stud quarterback, right? High draft capital, super flex economy, right? Only a few picks behind Trevor Lawrence, right? Okay. And those guys in real life, in NFL, have relative job security, right? Those, as much as we say, oh, the NFL has a short leash and not as much patience, I think that's true in the sense that they throw these guys in and play them too early, probably. But when you look at who is, gets this high draft capital, right? Especially who has rushing and who gets a leash of a couple years to figure it out. These guys do, if you go back and look historically at it, right? Like the guys who don't, are fewer. It's a small percentage. So, there's that, right? Now there might be a temporary value dip if he sits, and holds the clipboard. I get that, right? But we're talking about in general over the first, 2-3 years of the career, which is kind of where you're looking at as far as, making the decision about, is he a keeper, so to speak, right? Also, there's positional scarcity of quarterbacks in a super flex league, right? Especially if it's more than 12 teams, right? Both in quantity, right? There's just only so many quarterbacks to go around, right? And quality, right? The quarterback landscape is icky, like I mentioned before, right? And by the way, even Stroud and Young, people are slotting them in, I think, a little too high at 13 and 14 and things like that. Like, it's not like people are slotting them in, at 6, 7, right? Like the guys coming in aren't necessarily, the golden boy Trevor Lawrence is, right? So the quarterback landscape is bleak, right? And there's also scarcity in availability, right? Even if you say to yourself, okay, well, super flex league, positional scarcity, scarcity of very good quarterbacks, right? I can throw, I don't know, whatever, the kitchen sink at somebody and they'll give me Patrick Mahomes. Will they? Like, how easy and possible and plausible is it that you can trade for a guy like that, right? Which means, or not even which means, but also in addition, we always know these guys are cheapest to find in rookie drafts, right? This is the way it is, and startups, right? But, this is when if your league's already been in process, right? And you're looking at a rookie draft, you want the quarterback, you got to take him now, right? Otherwise it's eminently hard later on to acquire a good one, right? So taking the chance on one that might be good is pretty cost effective, right? So all that kind of builds in, I think, to the idea that Richardson's worth it, right? All things considered, all factors factored in, Richardson is the bet to make, right? So this chart here, we're going to get a little nerdy. I credit a Daco, I'm not really sure how to pronounce it. I've never heard it. I've only read it. Looking at, it's a little bit of a nerdy stat, but like wins over replacement, right? By position, right? And the green is quarterback, the red is running back, the yellow is wide receiver, and the blue is tight end, right? And so the y-axis, I forget from high school math. Anyway, the one going up, the vertical one, is the amount of wins over replacement that we're predicting for the position, right? And the bottom axis, I think that's the X, right? Is ADP, particularly among the positions, right? So you're drafted at quarterback 2 versus quarterback 30 or whatever, right? As you can see, quarterbacks lose their wins over replacement value only when you get into after like QB 24, right? So again, these are even risky quarterbacks in a big picture are safe investments, relative to other positions, right? And this also, links into the idea that they retain their value, and they retain their value because of charts like this, right? So I think there's a different way to look at all this than is the common discourse of, risk reward, floor ceiling, and that sort of thing. I don't think it's risk versus reward in this sense, right? A lot of times when we talk about risk reward, it's like we take this risk to get this, and is it worth X risk to get Y payoff, right? And the two are often juxtaposed as kind of like opposite binary dichotomous, right? Like you know, you're either going to get rewarded, right? Or, you know, there's going to be a failure and that constitutes the risk you took. I'm looking at this a little differently. And, you know, maybe I'm, you know, not on to anything here. The reward is in the risk, right? Okay. And this is another thing that I think Jakob has written about on his Substack, right? I'm not going to do it justice, but in Dynasty, right? There are, like I said, we mix our bets and things like that, right? But there's an argument to be made that too many conservative choices, safe choices, are actually risky, right? Because what you get from safety is essentially middling outcomes, right? You're rewarded for some big swings, like Richardson, even if we say he's a big swing. I've made the case that he probably isn't as big a swing as people think, but you're actually rewarded for that, right? Because when the bottom falls out, you're rewarded with the high draft picks, right? You're rewarded with, you know, the 101, the 102, the 103, right? And whether you use that or trade it, that's what you're rewarded with, right? You know, and if they super hit, right, and those bets go well, those swings turn into home runs, right? Well, you know, you get some championships and some money, right? You know, and I think, I mean, I've been using this baseball analogy of swing. Look at what's developed in baseball with the 3 true outcomes and all that, and home runs and strikeouts, and, you know, that sort of thing. Like, you know, you don't see a lot of teams anymore, you know, stringing together base hits, right? Let's get a lot of singles and doubles, right? Young and Stroud, I mean, even if I agree that they're safer and less risky, they're singles and doubles, right? And, you know, Richardson is the home run, right? And you can absorb a couple of strikeouts, because what I'm saying here is there isn't risk because you're rewarded for taking the risk. You have a safety net, right? You have a safety net of a lot of things, of value retention and value insulation. You have a safety net of the high draft capital if the bottom falls out, right? So therefore, the risk is rewarding, right? There's reward in taking that risk, right? And in some sense, because he has that ceiling, right? The ceiling is the floor. He's made the safe bet by the fact that the upside is so big, right? A big upside quarterback is in itself a safe investment through production, if it hits, value retention, value insulation, wins over replacement, job security, right? Like, and through, you know, the safety net you have if it fails, right? The ceiling is the floor, right? So, you know, in Dynasty, we mix our bets. You know, we try to get string together some smaller bets that maybe, you know, seem safe. We get a number of those right. And so that missing on the riskier ones is more absorbable, right? The whole, you know, mixed portfolio kind of thing that I was talking about before. So even if you accept that Richardson is inherently more risky, you know, we have to mix our bets. Otherwise, we're not doing it right. And this is coming from somebody who's traditionally been very risk averse. And I'm starting to, I don't want to say evolve because it makes it sound like I'm like better or further along, but like I'm changing on this a little bit, right? Playing it safe, what does that get you? You know, or it's just, I should say playing it safe, you know, 95% of the time, what does that get you, right? Still though, I'm even making the argument that a guy like Anthony Richardson and a guy like Xavier Hutchinson are both good bets, just maybe for different reasons. We might even call them safe bets, just maybe for different reasons, right? What we're looking at is, you know, a total floor play in Xavier Hutchinson, you know, a savvy veteran, nothing elite, but well-rounded, and is going to, you know, command targets, and he's going to have a floor, right? He's not going to wow anybody with Jalen Hyatt speed or, you know, that sort of thing, right? He's a safe bet, right? There's little risk in Xavier Hutchinson, right? And what I'm saying is Richardson is a safe bet just for completely different reasons, the ones that I've outlined these last few minutes. And as you can hear, the dogs are getting a little restless. It's probably time to go outside for a walk and get them their senior citizen dinner. So I'm just gonna kind of wrap up here with a quote from Jakob's essay that I think really just sums it up in a nutshell better than I could. Right? I don't mean to brag, but there are a few people who can make me feel unsmart about things and have to like reread things. Jakob is one of them. My reading and writing muscles aren't what they used to be since I quit my PhD program. But I'm often pushed. My thinking is pushed, and I'm having aha moments when I listen to people who look at Dynasty the way that Jakob does. And so he says here, like, put generally, here's the take, right? The probability that Richardson is a viable enough passer, like mediocre NFL average passer, right, to keep the offense on the field and then therefore score a lot of fantasy points with TDs, with rushing, et cetera, is higher than the probability that a pocket quarterback prospect, right, like Stroud, Young, right, is not only viable, but special enough in their passing, absent the rushing, and in a situation favorable enough, even though he uses a U and favorable like a Canadian, that they'll produce an elite fantasy ceiling, right? In the event that neither ceiling case hits, whether it's Stroud or whether it's AR, and I would lump Young into here with Stroud. I don't think Jakob does, right? Whatever the range of outcomes that includes Stroud as a Jared Goffian QB2, while Richardson falls out of the league, is something that we're willing to eat, right? Because of the payoff. Dynasty success is primarily determined by the production and market value of your most impactful players, which Richardson is, both in production with that ceiling, but also in market value, right? Already as a young stud quarterback with first round draft capital. And both of those production and market value could go up, right? Decisions ought not to be made on the basis which losing outcome is less detrimental, right? In other words, we're not saying which loss hurts us more. In some sense, we have to say, with QB in a super flex, right, which win helps us more, right? And I think clearly the answer here is that the Richardson win helps us more. Right? So I hope this has been helpful. It's probably rung on a little longer than I've wanted, but you can ask my students. I like to talk, and sort of break these things down. So I appreciate folks who have stayed this long and watched. You can follow me on Twitter at @ffjunkie_. You can follow the show at Dynasty Fever Pod. This is not an official Dynasty Fever opinion. Jesse probably disagrees with me. You can find Jesse also on a podcast called Dynasty War Games. You can find me also on the goingfor2.com family of content with articles and rankings and a podcast I do there on Saturday nights. We drop Dynasty Fever episodes every Thursday. We record Wednesday and drop Thursday every week around the whole calendar year, even in the off season. We take weeks off occasionally here and there, right? But that's where you can find us. And please, this is a very fledgling video channel, YouTube channel. I don't know how much videos we're going to be doing. I happen to have the time to have done a few recently, but it'd be really cool if you could like this video and subscribe to the channel, maybe even turn on those notifications so that, when I do or we do the occasional video, you get that little ping, right? I think we're going to do, if not a live mock, we might live stream us talking about a rookie mock that was sort of pre-done. So we got to talk about that. But anyway, so hopefully we're going to be using the channel at least a little bit more moving forward. So, please give us a like and a subscribe. Again, thanks for listening. Polite feedback, whether positive or negative, in the comments section is welcome. Remember, I'm going to put links in the description for a lot of the things that I cited and referenced in this video. So Yeah. Anthony Richardson, QB1. Let's do it.